Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to another live as we talk about International Muslim History Month. It's May, so that means it's time. So, last Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, if you joined us for that live, welcome back. If you're new and you're like, what is Muslim History Month? Welcome. I'm going to just give you a little brief intro to what's going on. And I'm your host, Ashley Pearson Khan. I realized for the past several times I've gone live, I've never mentioned who I am. So, all right, International Muslim History Month was founded in 2021, so that's how long we've been doing this, by the World Hijab Day organization and has officially been recognized by New York State since its inception. It's celebrated every May, this month is dedicated to tackling global Islamophobia by acknowledging and celebrating the powerful contributions that Muslims have made around the world. And to commemorate this month, we're hosting this virtual conference every Friday in May at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, live on all of our social media platforms at World Hijab Day. It's our time to tell our story. So we wanted to invite you to join us to mark this month by sharing a simple social media post by using the hashtag Muslim History. And today I've got an amazing guest who's very passionate about talking about a certain topic, and that topic is Muslim empires and their global legacy. So today I am joined by Noor Seda, and I meant to ask her how to pronounce her last name, so I hope I got that right. We'll see. So Noor is a co-founder of Noorart, has led Islamic multimedia and education in North America for over 25 years. She is a classical music performer. She's known for her beloved Islamic audio albums. She writes Islamic columns globally and is an active speaker in Dallas's Muslim community. She is currently studying Islamic history, focusing on the Ottoman Empire. So please welcome Miss Noor. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam, Ashley. Thank you for the introduction. It's Saadi. You have the
Okay, I
Arabic
was like, oh
Saadi
gosh,
in
I'm
there.
going to ask.
No, it's okay. Most people get it pretty close, so as long as you ask. Thank you so much for your kind introduction and welcome everybody. We're coming in live to 8 o'clock, bright and early from Dallas, Texas. It's a
Oh
beautiful
yes,
spring
you're an
day.
hour behind me. I'm in Toronto.
Yes. When I saw that, I said, oh boy. Try to be very perky this time of the morning, inshallah. I was with it.
All right. Oh,
So
I'm
let's,
excited.
I'm just going to hand it over to me.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to do, Ashley. Okay.
Yes. So
So we'll
we've
start with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. And peace and blessings be upon our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rabbi zidni ilma. Oh Allah, increase me in guidance. And may I make that dua for all of you. So why is it vital to study Islamic history and civilization? And Ashley's going to be my co-host here. She's going to pop slides and things like that. And we can go back and forth to picture and slides, inshallah. In my pre-Muslim days, I was a professional classical singer. And while singing in New York City and a great coffee lover, I walked into a cafe run by an Egyptian. I like learning about people. So I said, tell me about pyramids, Egypt. Later on, he mentioned that he was a Muslim. And I was very embarrassed to tell him I knew nothing about Islam. Never knew a Muslim, never saw a woman in hijab. He began by telling me that about the monotheism of Islam, much like Judaism and Christianity, but perhaps the most monotheistic with the same line of prophets that I knew growing up in America. This was a revelation. I had spent the earlier part of my career performing in worship services of the different denominations of Christianity and Judaism. Much of my repertoire was sacred. I thought I knew all there was to know about monotheism and other faiths. And I'd settled on a belief that as long as you followed a path to God, it didn't matter which one. And I ridiculously asked him, are there a lot of Muslims in the world? Of course, this is the late 1980s, and I had my head in a music score. I had imagined Muslims were some sort of Eastern religion. In the libraries I frequented and the bookstores, Judaism and Christianity were in one section, Islam and Eastern religions in another. This seems insignificant, but it's not. I was immediately intrigued and wanted to know more. The more questions I asked, the more I read in the English meaning of the Quran he'd given me, the more my brain lit up with what I could only perceive to be as the truth. capital T. But the nagging questions were, how can it be that I don't know about this and that no one I know knows about this? And most importantly, who's been hiding this? Also significant. Now, I'm not a scholar or an author. I'm just an ordinary Muslim like many of you out there, or people who might be curious and are listening today. My curiosity kicked in, and my desire to know, especially when I found that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informs us in the Holy Quran to seek knowledge, read, iqra, travel to the ends of the earth and see what was left of the people who came before you, both versed in Surat al-Rum, the Romans, and in Surat al-Ankabut, the spider. And what is the Quran, after all, but a book of history? Oh, not yet. I'll tell you. Actually, thanks. In addition to Aqidah, creed, belief, and guidance, good tidings, and warnings, the Quran is a book replete with historical references, 24 mentions and detailed stories of prophets and their people, the children of Israel, sleepers of the cave, villains and heroes of old. Why study history? Why indeed Allah commands it? Next one, please. Next one. I must have missed one in there. I will back up a little bit. Sorry. Let's go back to. Thanks. One more. Back one more, dear. Thank you. So we deal with a lot of isms and beliefs these days in our society, like secularism, individualism, and modernity. So how does Islam connect or disconnect with these things? And this is where things get sticky. Harking back to my original question, who's been hiding this? There's the famous quotation that those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. And that perhaps defines where the Muslim Ummah is today. Muslims are fairly well versed about the seerah of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, perhaps the four rightly guided caliphs, and that there was a Muslim Spain and an Ottoman Empire, but we're vague on the details. There are even some Muslim influencers who admonish us to stop wallowing sentimentally in history, pining for the good old days and praying for a caliph to emerge. Most regretfully, we are a colonized ummah across the board, colonized by Western powers. My Ottoman history professor quips that the exception were the Turks, who colonized themselves and shed their Ottoman identity and replaced it with Turk nationalistic fever. In just a mere 100 years ago, in 1923, the Ottoman Empire was abolished. The Caliphate and Sultanate were ushered and exiled out. This is very recent history. Much like Islamic Spain, this vast empire was a model of tolerance, diversity, and pluralism, whose subject civilizations and contributions thrived for centuries. Despite their ancestral origins, eventually the people were Ottoman first. Existing for nearly 600 years, beginning in the early 14th century, the empire encompassed vast territories across Anatolia, the Balkans, the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Europe, spanning 3 continents and 72 nations. In medieval Spain, Arabic became the lingua franca during the Muslim reign. In fact, Isabella and Ferdinand were initially forced to adapt and adopt to the existing customs and learn the Arabic language when they entered during the Reconquista. Unlike Western colonial powers, Muslims were civilization builders, not colonizers, not settlers. They brought integration and civilization. There was no forced conversion, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in Surah Al-Baqarah. There is no compulsion in religion. Excuse me, that's the Surah of the Cow, verse 256. The empires brought integration and civilization, and following a conquest, the normal life of citizens quickly returned, allowing Islam to freely penetrate the society so that its principles and ethics could be seen in action. A rule defined by mercy, tolerance, and justice encouraged the populations to accept Islam or retain their religious identity and live in peace. A lot different than what we hear in the Western media, right? Rules of engagement, war, and its after effects, how to deal with defeated peoples, prisoners, and slaves, were regulated according to the Quran and the example within the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Although Western media equates transatlantic slavery with its Ottoman or Arabic counterpart, they could not have been more unalike. Men, women, and children were gathered from the defeated peoples, and many were brought into the empire for military service or within the palace. There was a system that selected one boy from every household, every 40 households. The family was paid a stipend, and the boys were educated in Islam and most often placed in the Ottoman military wing, the Janissaries. Women were brought into the palace, also educated according to their skill sets, to teach, work, serve, and also to be prepared for the very daunting task as a potential wife for the Sultan. Both men and women could rise to the highest levels in the court and the empire. Now you could go to the next slide, Ashley, please. This gentleman was a Greek slave who was one of the boys picked up in the system and brought into the Islamic Ottoman Empire. He was brought into the palace and became a favorite of Sultan Suleiman, the Magnificent. And he rose and rose and rose into the ranks until he became the Grand Vizier, or the highest in rank next to the Sultan himself, and a very good friend of the Sultan. So within the empire, a slave could rise to the highest ranks to become next to the Sultan or had the wife of the Sultan. So it's a very different slavery system without the torture and the dehumanization and degradation that we often see in the transatlantic slavery. There's an excellent comparative listen about this topic between transatlantic slavery and Ottoman Arab slavery, done by Rudolph Butch-Ware, who was a running mate for Jill Stein in the last elections. By the way, he's also running for governor of California right now. So that's on the podcast Unapologetic. Excellent, excellent discussion. He's a wonderful professor of African history at UC Santa Barbara. Back to the Ottomans, the walls of the city of Vienna marked the apex of the Ottoman Empire's power. But everything Ottoman soon became the subject of admiration in the European courts. You know, I mentioned I loved coffee. I discovered better, stronger coffee when I was auditioning and singing in Europe. And I adopted what I thought was a Viennese age-old tradition of heading to a coffee shop in the afternoon to read and discuss the politics and news of the day. Coffee, beans via Ethiopia, via Yemen, via the Ottoman Empire, where the espresso-type coffee finally reached Vienna, then Europe. During this farthest attempt to enter further into Europe, the Ottomans fell back from Vienna, unable to sustain a siege at such a distance, abandoning their staples and equipment along the way. The Viennese were in a quandary over what to do with the beans until a prisoner showed them how to grind and brew them. And that's how your favorite brew entered Europe and North America. Allah works in mysterious ways. I took my Shahada, the testimony of faith that makes me a Muslim, in a coffee shop in New York City. Ibn Khaldun, widely acknowledged to be one of the greatest social scientists of the Middle Ages, wrote that history is cyclical. What goes around comes around, and nothing lasts forever. As do empires, world powers, good and evil, heroes and villains. Nothing stays forever. Next slide, please. Authors Diana Dark, The Ottomans, A Cultural Legacy. Next slide. And Bashir Ahmed, Muslim Contributions to World Civilization, both mind-blowing books, cite that Turkish coffee was not only popping up in Europe, but the iconic Turkish cafe populated London in the 17th century, far outshining tea as the nation's cup of choice. I was astounded reading that. While Ottomans considered Europe a backwater, not worthy of their attention, everything Ottoman was all the rage in Europe. Textiles and fashions were in demand by the ruling and upper classes. The meager military bands of the Janissaries, who had struck fear into the hearts of their enemies, were the inspiration behind Beethoven's Turkish marches, and the Western imagined and fantasized harem in Mozart's opera, The Abduction from the Seraglio, in addition to other composers' favor of Turkish music. Slide, please. And that's our Turkish coffee cup. I think there's a lot more presentation to it than anything. The Turks just have this beautiful way of presenting their coffee. And next slide, please. Tulips went much the same route as coffee. First mentions of tulips in the region were in the 11th century, and by the 1500s, they were cultivated and flourished throughout the Ottoman Empire. They were then introduced to Western Europe in the late 16th century via Austria and then to the Netherlands. The Ottomans saw the shape of the tulip, next slide please, resembling the name of Allah in Arabic. And the iconic tulip design is found in its ornate tiles that adorn every mosque in the region, in textiles and ceramics throughout Turkey today. Next slide, please. In author and architectural historian Diana Dark's fantastic books on Islamic architecture, this one, Stealing from the Saracens, a fantastic play on words, literally stealing from the thieves, Saracens, a once popular derogatory term for Arabs as plunderers. And next slide. In Islamesque, the forgotten craftsman who built medieval Europe's monuments, she awakens readers to an awareness of cultural and architectural connections the West has seldom considered. How Muslim artisans and architects played a significant role in the design and building of historical monuments that are so famous in Europe today. She has marvelous videos on YouTube. If you just Google Diana Dark, she's got a nice couple short ones, but they will send you running to pick up her book. Absolutely amazing. She's a British historian who's been living in Syria for many years. But the question is, do we make these connections today? I asked some friends of mine the other day at the Dallas Arboretum when we saw the tulips blossoming. I said, okay, where did tulips come from? Holland, they all said. I said, nope. But I digress. Islamic empires dissolved, now a thing of the past for history books. Although colonization and nation states are declining, their effects still live on. This divide and conquer theory has created divisions all over the Muslim world, whereas Allah calls for unity and solidarity, standing shoulder to shoulder in our daily congregational prayers, the Hajj, the yearly global gathering for pilgrimage, where one's status is reduced to simple white garments, signifying neither king nor pauper, no nation. Allah calls us to reflect in Surah Hujurat. He created us to know one another, not despise and hate one another. Verse 13. So what happened to us? Next slide, please. Oh, that's in the wrong spot. Next one. That's where that slide went. There we go. Western colonization of Muslim lands. This is a big one. So the colonizers came in and created artificial borders and divisions, which created arbitrary borders, for example, like in Iraq, Syria, Jordan, splitting ethnic and religious groups and fostering long-term instability and conflict. Many current tensions in the Middle East can be traced back to these divisions. There was an area called Balad Sham, which was Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine. This was all just one area until after World War I and II. Resource exploitation. I think we all know about that one. Colonial powers extracted valuable natural resources like oil from the Middle East and cotton in Egypt to fuel European economies, leaving the local economies underdeveloped and dependent on foreign powers, while their own industries were often suppressed. Western powers often installed or supported autocratic rulers who served colonial or post-colonial interests, creating fragile political systems that lacked legitimacy in the world, often leading to revolutions, coups, or foreign interventions. This is political manipulation and weak institutions. Military interventions and occupations. We saw the British in Egypt, the French in Algeria, the Italians in Libya. This caused widespread resistance, uprisings, and social disruption, leaving a legacy of militarized politics and resistance in the countries. Erosion of Islamic governance and legal systems. European legal, administrative, and educational systems replace the traditional Islamic institution, undermining centuries-old systems of Islamic jurisprudence, scholarship, and creating identity crises and conflicts over modernization versus tradition. And we'll see that a lot. Western cultural norms, education systems, and languages were promoted at the expense of local traditions, leaving many Muslims alienated from their heritage and creating cultural elites more aligned with Western values that caused a lot of societal divides. The colonial regimes often exploited the ethnic and sectarian differences, the divide and rule theory. We saw Sunni versus Shiite, problems with the Jewish and the Christian communities, which in many years in the past and centuries we've gotten along with so well. These divisions have persisted into modern times, leading to civil wars and sectarian violence. Next slide, please. Okay, let's go on. My slides are all out of order. We'll go on, please. Oh, maybe back up. Sorry, I thought everything was in perfect order. Go back 1, 2, 3. And I'll just keep talking. We're going to talk about marginalization of Islamic education. One more back, please. Okay, we'll just stay there. There's been marginalization of Islamic traditional education. And I think, secondly, and more importantly, we become an ummah that no longer reads or produces written thought and literature. And this is due to the marginalization of our traditional Islamic education. The colonial powers often dismissed or actively dismantled Islamic institutions like madrasas, the schools, and the ulama, the scholarship. English language became the dominant language. Colonizers introduced Western-style schools that emphasized European history, science, and values while neglecting Islamic studies. In Algeria, under French rule, Arabic and Islamic education were suppressed, while French was made the primary language of instruction. This created a westernized elite disconnected from traditional Islamic thought, again, making a divide between the modernists and the traditionalists Islamically. Colonial regimes produced their own languages at the expense of Arabic, Persian, promoted their own languages at the expense of Arabic, Persian, Urdu, and other, particularly Islamic languages that were derived from the Quran. This severed the link between the students and the classical Islamic traditions, which is deeply tied to the Arabic language. The newly formed nation of Turkey completely reimagined the Arabic language into a Latinized script, which also served to alienate its citizens from their heritage. There was a destruction of indigenous knowledge systems. They portrayed Islamic and local knowledge as inferior, irrational, backward. This discouraged the development of indigenous science, philosophy, and rationalist traditions within Islam, neglecting or erasing and even changing the names of the legacy of some thinkers like Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina became Avicenna, Ibn Rushd, Averroes, and Al-Farabi. Many of these names in Italian are the names known, which we assume these are European scientists and discoverers, not Muslims. Education was used as a tool of control. They were designed to produce obedient colonial subjects rather than critical thinkers. And because I have a home also in Jordan, my husband's Palestinian, I see this in Jordan very much, the effects of all these things so much in the many, many years I've spent going back and forth there and living there. Culture and independent thought were often suppressed, is still suppressed, especially if it challenged local colonial authority or supported Islamic revivalism. The Western nations modernized their universities and their research institutions. Colonial subjects were largely denied access to advanced education. So these post-independence Muslim majority countries were left with underdeveloped education systems, struggling to reconcile religious and secular knowledge. So some Muslim groups restricted, because of this, all forms of Western education, which led again to the polarization between rigid traditionalism and uncritical Westernization, undermining efforts at balanced reform. So there's a lot of mess out there that we wonder what's happened to us, largely, and we don't want to blame colonialism, but I think colonialism is very much to blame and is still existing now. There's a notable placement of pro-Western Islamic secular thought among scholars and imams, even here in the West, who emphasize the fara'id, or the compulsory pillars, but neglect the values of tolerance, anti-racism, civility, justice, mercy, enjoining good and forbidding wrong, family values, and ethics in their actions and their speeches. Ensuring that Islam stays safely within the structure of Western secularism, a separate part of life, not the encompassing total way of life it was meant to be, and modeled in former Muslim civilizations. And we're struggling with that now, especially our younger generation are very much affected by the advent and rise of secularism. You can be Muslim, pray, fast, give zakat, make your pilgrimage, but we don't want to know much more about you other than that, especially your ethics and values and things like that. There's been an intentional erasure of people, their traditions, their culture, and their knowledge, their history, and notable characters, both good and bad. And there were some bad players in Islamic history, but they were not the norm. There has been misrepresentation, replacement, and a lack of acknowledgement for Islam's glorious civilization and contributions to the world. And it's nothing new. Christian Europe has had a field day since Islam rose out of the desert sands. Next slide, please. There we go. For example, in her book, Sophia Rose Arjana, Muslims in Western Imagination, every single chapter begins with Muslim monsters. Next slide. Take a little peek at that contents page. That just blew me away. You read this book and you want to scream, and then you want to laugh, and then you want to cry. But it's amazing. She's not saying they were these things. This is what the West imagined Muslims to be. One of the craziest things she wrote about was there's so many artworks that depict Jews and Muslims at the crucifixion of Jesus. Muslims are depicted either very dark-skinned and African-looking or with the Turkish fez on their head. This is just crazy, right? If you have any knowledge whatsoever, this is bizarre stuff. So let's go to the next slide. Yep. I just do recommend, we'll come back to him. How does the study of Islamic civilization and history provide the path to action rather than reaction? So this is where we're going to give you some action points, I hope. So my intention is not to cry doom and gloom, but Muslims need to wake up. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls on us to reflect, contemplate, and consider. Tadabbur is a crucial element of understanding and benefiting from the Quran. It involves pondering over the verses, understanding their meanings, and contemplating their relevance to one's life. It's not passive. It requires active engagement, much like our prayer. We also need a sincere desire for knowledge and wisdom, in opposition to the mindless scrolling we do on social media and browsing. And apologize, everybody, you can't learn history from a 10-minute discussion or a short on YouTube. You might be inspired to learn more, but too often it's merely a bunch of names and dates, or worse, a very westernized narrative Islamic history, particularly of the more recent Ottoman Empire. Okay, now next slide, please. Let's bring up Dr. Yaqub. There we go. My music history professor in university taught his students to learn why composers wrote the way they did, the societal influences of their particular time. And this is an excellent way to approach studies in Islamic history. So I highly recommend this gentleman. This is Dr. Yaqub Ahmed, an Ottoman and Islamic historian. He is extremely knowledgeable and eminently relatable no matter your generation. He's extremely humble, and everything he says is absolutely mind-blowing. He will elaborate on the incredible, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and also tell you why. So he's very, very balanced. And as Dr. Yaqub Ahmed says, let's unpack that. Why did the Muslims decline? Why did this? Why did that? Let's unpack why. Going back to my music history professor who said we need to know why the composers wrote the way they did based on what was happening in the society. So Muslims might have done something bad, but when we go back and look at it, at least we understand the why of what they did. It doesn't make it better or okay or less haram or forbidden. We just have to understand the why of it, which is a lot more important than just condemning people right and left. So, okay, next slide. Let's see what we have next. There we go. And then there's modernism. So do we connect or disconnect with that too? There's a lovely definition of deen, or way of life, that it's the intersection of Allah and others. I thought that was very important and lovely to think about. Even it's like our shahada. We had the first part was ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, I believe. Well, Muhammad Rasulullah. Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. Muhammad is the action, right? We believe in Allah and in the Quran that he revealed. We believe that Muhammad was the prophet in the revelation and read the revelation to us, or brought it to us, but he also enacted the Quran. So it's both belief and action. So I really like this, that we believe in Allah, we worship him, we speak to him in our prayer, but most of our day is spent interacting with others. And Islam is all about that reaction with others and acting out with others. So capitalism. In the Quran, Allah orders zakat, a distribution of wealth, moving wealth around, not wealth for wealth's sake. Remember that the poor and the disenfranchised have rights over us, that wealth and prosperity are as much a trial as a blessing, and that Allah's favor and pleasure is not exemplified only by wealth and success. Consumerism, waste is disliked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Doesn't consumerism consume the average Muslim in the West, where products are made to be disposable? Industrialization has done really a number on us. I'm not sure history will look very kindly back on us on industrialization. It did a lot of things to advance the things people have, but it didn't do a lot for humanity. Muslim civilizations were based on family structure and values. We see women entering universities in multitudes and having careers where our menfolk are failing. Where's the rite of passage for boys? Young men once left their homes at puberty to join their fathers or other adult males to learn a trade or skill. But fathers now disappear into an office, and boys are left home with females as their role models until university or marriage. The individualism of this particular time, the nafs, the ego, is our biggest enemy and an easy target. For why else was Iblis, the devil, barred from heaven? In the Quran, we are admonished to forego our comfort for the sake of others and not for the me, myself, and I cry of individualism. We are taught that the best among us shuns arrogance and pride. Prayer is commanded to be in congregation, not alone and private. It's all about feeling good and being happy, right? Amusing reels, influencers, personalities. All this is what Allah refers to in Surah Al-Hadid 57, ayat 20. Know that the worldly life is no more than play, amusement, luxury, mutual boasting, and competition and wealth and children. The life of this world is no more than the delusion of enjoyment. And aren't we just deluded away nowadays? We are stuck on that phone and scrolling away. People are always asking Muslims, why don't we modernize? Remove that backward hijab, assimilate, join the secular movement. Islam is the only religion that has not morphed into something entirely different than its original inception. Muslims pray and fast as our Prophet did 1400 years ago. Women in particular carry the banner of hijab that sets us apart as believing women. And the fast of Ramadan is carried out exactly as before. Western thought has coined traditional a dirty word, and that anything before modern was backward and we're well rid of it. My Egyptian friend explained that Islam can be summarized by 3 C's. It came to concur with what came before, to correct what changes had been made by men, and it came to conclude with the last divine revelation and prophet. The Quran is a holy book and guidance for all mankind for all time, and it will never lose its relevance. So we Muslims must attach ourselves to the Quran. Read in whatever your mother tongue is to understand. It's the guidebook or manual of life that the West is always yearning for and searching. Islam provides answers and guidance for the current sorry state of our very corrupt and warring world. Remember, the first word of revelation remains relevant. Iqra, read, reflect, recite. We read, we reflect, then we share our knowledge, just like what I'm hoping to do today, inshallah. Next slide, yeah, actually. We'll go, yeah, they're backwards. One more. Okay. History is boring. What can I do? Well, it can be boring. How can the average Muslim learn more? So there's a lot of things you can do. How many of you out there watch Ertugrul? The Muslim world was just head over heels with Ertugrul. Finally, a Muslim character. We hadn't seen anything since The Message which was filmed in 1960 something. We kept watching The Message every year, and it was getting kind of old, and half the actors were not Muslims anyway, and they weren't pronouncing the names correctly. But subhanAllah, the Turks came out with this Ertugrul series and the Kai tribe, and the Muslim world lit up. Finally, an inspirational, a real Muslim, a pious Muslim, a practicing Muslim, a manly Muslim, and his entire tribe, and how they started this incredible movement toward the building of the Ottoman Empire. But there's life beyond Ertugrul. There is a website, which I'll show you later on, that you can go to get all the English subtitles of so many series. There's one that follows. Let's go for the next picture. That should be, oh, those are books. Okay. They're all out of order. Go, go, go. Okay. I don't know why they're so out of order. Go ahead. Okay, we're going to get to these books. There you go. One more. Here he is. There's the handsome Ertugrul. Okay, next slide. I talk about traveling with purpose. Um, I was watching Ertugrul during COVID when my husband was in lockdown in Jordan. I was here, and they became my family. The Kai tribe became my family. And I watched all 5 seasons on Netflix night after night after night after night. And I even started rewatching it because when it ended, I felt like I lost my family. And I started watching Osman, and it wasn't quite as good. And a friend told me, you have to watch Abdul Hamid. I said, who's that? Oh my. And I started watching this series, which is an amazing. This is the Sultan, the last Sultan who was where the Sultanate ended and really the empire ended, the caliphate ended. He was 33 years in power from 1876 to 1909 when he was exiled. He was in power for 33 years. He was an amazing, and he's listed as one of the greatest sultans of the Ottoman Empire. And this is current history. That was what was so fascinating. And there's the drama, of course, of Turkish series. But what was fascinating was the character and the intelligence of this man. One of the few Western powers that he aligned with was Germany, and Kaiser Wilhelm came to pay a visit, and he actually helped building this remarkable railway that was going to extend from the Ottoman Empire down to Mecca, Medina, and Al-Quds. And Kaiser Wilhelm said of him that Kaiser Wilhelm possessed 5% of the world's intelligence, and that Abdul Hamid possessed the rest. He had developed the first really central intelligence agency. He had spies all over all the other empires because the Ottoman Empire was really being battled by the colonial powers because they discovered the resources. They wanted to divide things up, take it apart, reduce their borders, get them out of Europe, so forth and so forth. So this man really struggled for 33 years. And eventually, the Young Turks were leaning more toward Europe, westernization, secularism. They'd been schooled over in Europe and taken all these ideas back, and they started protesting against this sultanate and this long dynasty of 33 years. So eventually, he was deposed by a fatwa, in which there were a lot of false accusations. And he said, if the people don't want me, I'll leave. He was already I think, in his 70s. Not only did they depose him, but they put him into exile for 9 years, a very horrible, uh, poverty-stricken exile. He and a very few members of his family. The rest of his family members were exiled into Europe, and most of them died rather penniless in Europe. Just now, in the latest, I'd say 20 years, his descendants have been able to enter Turkey again. He has a very well-known great-grandson and great-granddaughters. They're very active. But watching this show, every time a character appeared, I Google them, and sure enough, they were there. And it's really remarkable that the kind of person that he was and the struggle that he made. It's a different character than Ertugrul, and it's a lot more historically accurate with the drama mixed in. But it's an amazing series. And we had traveled to the Ottoman Empire, to Turkey many, many times, crossing over from Jordan. And I always thought, I need to get around to studying the Ottoman Empire. I'd look at all these incredible masajid and the skyline of Istanbul and say, I've really got to study this. I don't know anything about it. I had studied Islamic Spain with a dear friend of mine, gave a lecture in Dallas many years ago about medieval history of Spain. And again, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I think we heard about medieval Spain last week. But subhanAllah, it was so mind-blowing that I immediately ran out and started reading everything I could get my hands on. And eventually went to Spain, but very well armed with the history, because when you get to Spain, they're not going to help you learn about our history there. In fact, the Spanish are still celebrating the rejection and ejection of Muslims out of their country every year. In Seville, they make a big pageantry of throwing the Muslims into the sea. I believe in the city of Segovia, they erect an edifice of a mosque over a church, then enact all these plays of battling the Muslims, and eventually burn down the edifice of the mosque. So this kind of nonsense still goes on. But I do talk about traveling with purpose. My husband and I tend to go to countries where there's some Islamic presence, and we go for the nature also. For example, we went to Morocco to see the Islamic history there, but there's a lot more information, and the Moroccans will tell you about it. So I do also advise, traveling with purpose. And let's see, we can go back up a little bit. There's a couple nice books I wanted to recommend. Okay, there we go. Yeah, there we go. Lost Islamic History is a very nice book written by a Muslim author. And very nice. It goes all the way through lost Islamic history and all the notables and the different civilizations and so forth. And then the next one, please, Ashley. This is a book written by a National Geographic writer. And it's a very beautiful composition of all the lost names and lost philosophers, scientists, physicians, and everything that came out of Muslim Spain, subhanAllah, that we're still enjoying their works today and their achievements today, subhanAllah. And it's nice sometimes when you're talking to people that they'll say, oh, I don't want to read something a Muslim has to say. They're biased, as if no one's biased about their topics. But this is a very beautiful book, and it's good for having evidence handy that it's a non-Muslim author, but very, very factual, inshallah. Next one, please. Okay, of course, social media. I mentioned Dr. Butch Ware, wonderful podcast with him on Unequivocal. If you can find anything by Dr. Ahmed, he's on YouTube. He doesn't really have much of a social media presence. He's a very humble guy, but he has a lot of videos. Someone had gathered all his videos in one spot on YouTube. But this particular one I listed here is a good start. There's so many starters. Anything you listen to him, within 5 minutes, you'll be hooked. Very lovely, relatable man. He's a big anime fan, and he'll give you a 20-minute dissertation about the history of manga. Amazing. But that kind of connects the younger generation to him quite well. And then this great website. There are a lot of websites where you can get the subtitles in English for all the historical series. But this one is the original one. It started off with 2 people that were translating Ertugrul beyond what Netflix did. They now have a staff of 20, and they also do subtitles in Spanish. And when the production airs that evening in Turkey, they start translating immediately. And even here in Dallas, we'll have it that same night by about 6 or 7 o'clock. So they've really upped their game. So you don't have to wait too long to get the episode. There's another, I don't know if there's a picture there or not. You want to scroll again? There's another marvelous, not Ertugrul, not Abdul Hamid, next one. This is the latest series. This is Mehmed the Conqueror, who opened Constantinople. It is fantastic. I think it way surpasses Ertugrul. The cast is amazing. You'll see a lot of your favorite villains from Ertugrul and other characters. It's so well acted and so well scripted and so well costumed and so well filmed. It's just amazing. And they're telling us there's going to be a season 3. Excuse me, we've just entered Constantinople, and the siege was just incredible. MashaAllah, the Turks. May Allah bless the Turks for what they're doing. All these. And there's many more historical series, too, that if you go on to kfamilytv.com, there's a lot there. But please go to them because there's a lot of copycats. They steal their name and their subtitles and call themselves even the same name and logo. It's horrendous. But these are the original guys, and they're really sweet. Of course, I got working with them years ago because I got so hooked on them in history. So once you open the door to Islamic history, you'll be surprised, enlightened, inspired, frustrated, and often very angry, as it's obvious now that certain groups control Western media, wherein there's enormous representation and anti-Islamic bias in nearly everything we see and read. But you will keep coming back for more. The good news is that if we search, the algorithms will find us and provide us with a plethora of great information that urge us to learn more. My whole page is Ottoman this and Ottoman that and Sultan this and Sultan that. So, and also Islamic history. I just get so many posts on Instagram and Facebook every day. So we want to build an ummah of action and not reaction. We don't want to be just passive onlookers. We want to learn and then get out there and think and start challenging the narrative. And once you know some of these Islamic historical facts, you will have evidence for those trolls online and the naysayers and the Islamophobes. You have a nice answer like, here's the evidence, bang, ma salama, bye. So I think it's an easier way to kind of get around some of the nasty things people say to us. And as today's Turks say, kolay gelsin, may Allah make it easy. So going to the next one, this is kind of some fun stuff. Ottoman manners and etiquettes. This is the coolest thing. I don't know what European civilizations had this, but the Ottomans were just, subhanAllah, amazing. So if you're passing a house and there's a yellow flower in the flower box, it means there's a patient in the home. So be quiet. Keep the noise down. If you see a red flower in the flower box, that there's a girl of marriageable age. So be careful what you say as you're passing by that won't offend her sensibilities. When you're invited for coffee, they always serve it with a small glass of water. If you drink the water first, that means you're hungry. If you drink the coffee first, it's like, no thanks, I'll just take the coffee. Still today. In their homes, a lot of us have MashaAllah above our houses. They have written, Ya Malik al-Mulk, the real owner of my house is Allah. You would see two sets of door knockers, a small one and a large one on the doors. The small one indicated a woman was at the door. So perhaps the woman of the house would answer the door. The large one, of course, indicated a man. So the women would stay back in their family area. The man would answer the door. They still to this day have tremendous respect from the elderly. You always see Turks kissing their parents' hands in the hands of their elders. And you see that in Ertugrul in the series too. They still do that today. There was even a time when if a young person was walking behind someone elderly on the sidewalk, they wouldn't pass them for fear of disrespect. And the elder would say, no, no, son, go ahead, go ahead. They also have this lovely phrase, I've crossed the bar. When a Turk reaches 63 and someone asks him how old he is, or beyond 63, he says, I've crossed the bar, meaning that the death age of our Prophet ﷺ was 63, and they don't want to be offensive. And they always, when the Prophet is mentioned, they always, oh, there was my screen. They always place their hands over their hearts. And again, you see that in all the Turkish series. The way cities were started and villages, they first put in the musalla or the masjid, and like a ripple in a pond, the city spread out from the center, which was always the mosque or the musalla, subhanAllah. The Arabs or the Turks of this day, if you go to Turkey, you will see dogs and cats everywhere. You'll see these big old happy dogs tagged and largely sleeping, and cats everywhere you go. Next slide, please. Next one. So the Ottomans had laws about taking care of animals. They had the first animal hospital in history. When you bought a home, especially those people who had a bit of money, when you bought a home, you were commanded by law to build a birdhouse. And these are some examples of birdhouses on some of the more elite homes. And you will find those if you look, when you start looking for things, it's very exciting. I took a whole trip to Istanbul just looking. Abdul Hamid did not like he had very few portraits taken. Maybe one when he was a prince and one in his Middle Ages when he was installed as Sultan, and then one toward the end. He had the Muslim tugra, their signature, which all the sultans had, and he would have a symbol of his tugra on things that he constructed, saying a wudu fountain or something like that. So I started looking around for all these tugras of Abdul Hamid everywhere I went. I did like an Abdul Hamid trip to Istanbul to see where he'd been and the things he'd done. And they just recently opened his palace, Yildiz Palace, which was closed for many years. And now it's opened as a museum along with Dolmabahce Palace and Beylerbeyi Palace and so forth. So that's worth a visit. It's beautiful. Next slide, please. Next one. So the Ottomans were so concerned about the animals that they also always built divots in the streets that would collect water so that cats and dogs and other animals and birds could always have water. It's amazing. And they still are there today. You'll see cat shelters around the city and a lot of happy dogs sleeping in the sun. And go back one, Ashley. Yeah, this is a famous statue showing the respect they had for their women. Um, a enemy soldier had gone up to a Muslim woman and attacked her by trying to pull up her hijab. And her Ottoman brother stood up and knocked the man down, pointed a gun at him, and protected his sister. So that's been a very famous statue exemplifying that our Muslim brothers are supposed to and taking care of us the way they should and protecting us as our champions. I like to say the translation of the Quran of Kawamuna al-Nisa, that they are champions of all the women, their wives, their mothers, their sisters, their aunts, and all their Muslim sisters, subhanAllah. Let's see if I got another slide. You have some other little ditties here. Let's see. That's our birds. Oh, that's the end of it. But that's a couple little starting points. And I don't know if you have any questions. Yeah. Ashley, from you or anybody coming up with questions online?
A really great conversation, great presentation. I definitely learned a lot. I didn't even know that about tulips. I think that was so cool.
I was with a bunch of friends, and I asked them at the Arboretum, and I said, where'd they come from? Holland. Like, no, no. But that's what happens when you get just so excited about a particular empire and you study a lot. My friend who gave the lecture about Spain is now a scholar and a researcher. She's on Substack, mashallah, Reem El Ghanimi. So she's a little bit more academic than I can handle. What I like about Dr. Yaqub Ahmed, he's very, very relatable. Very relatable, mashallah. Very, very lovely, kind man. Very open to his students, and you can always ask questions all the time. And I chat with him. He's in Japan at the moment, but I chat with him quite a lot. And he gave me the big thumbs up today. Alhamdulillah. Thank you, Doctor.
Well, based on some comments I've seen, it looks like people were enjoying. Okay. Somebody tagged a friend to listen in, and it's been a steady stream of people. So I think everybody enjoyed it, and I wanted to thank you for your time. We're at almost an hour now, 15 minutes. So
great.
I appreciate your time and you sharing your knowledge. I love how passionate you are about it, and I definitely learned some stuff that's new to me. So yeah, is there anything else that maybe you didn't mention that you wanted to mention before we hop off of here?
It's just, when you make comparisons between the us and them type of thing, that I feel sometimes the West tends to project its fallibilities on us as Muslims, that they say we do this. In reality, if you look at history, Crusades, Inquisition, there's a museum of torture in Cordoba. And I had seen a video about it, and it's horrible. I visited there, and I went in and said, I'm not going in, but my menfolk went in like, oh, it's fine. They came out gray. The things that they can, in the city of Toledo in Spain, there is still a chair of nails proudly displayed. And searching this the other day, I found there's a museum of torture in London. I mean, what? Why? What a horrible thing. And unfortunately, the video I watched was of a young woman making fun of the whole thing and making like indiscreet references to things. It was horrible. So that's okay. We don't have any museums of torture in the Islamic world. And, there was a lot in Spain, subhanAllah, the Spanish Christians forcibly converted or expelled Muslims and Jews. The Jews actually were invited by Sultan Bayezid II. He sent ships to Spain to pick up the Jews and bring them back to the Ottoman Empire. And that's a big thing, that Jews were always sheltered in Islamic empires, always. They always had a free place for worship. They were always considered as citizenry. There wasn't any forced conversion. Spain was really horrific. The Spanish Christians, Catholic Christians, were really horrific. And even if a Muslim became Christian, was baptized, if you were clean, or if they somebody thought you were praying, or they heard the Arabic language, that was it for you. You were either exiled or killed or tortured. And there was their auto da fe, where they put people on fire, and that was their way of purifying them before they went. But Jews were completely expelled. But what you don't hear is you always hear the Jews were expelled from the Spanish, from Spain. You don't ever hear anything about Muslims. They tend to refer them always as Moors, Moors, Moors. And when I grew up, what was a Moor? I got this idea, okay, this like Eastern religion that worships idols or something like this. Allah is some sort of idol. Growing up with Western media and cinema, that's what we knew. And again, if you look, I did a lecture on this on YouTube, how much of Hollywood has been pushing this particular narrative that we follow today. And a lot of it is directed toward Palestine and Israel, what's going on there, subhanAllah. So a lot of good stuff out there. I think there was one more slide, just a couple more little tidbits maybe, if you want to go back. I don't want to bother you to go back though. Just some other little facts I was going to point out, but I don't see in my notes here.
Let me try to go back. I can see
if you can. Yeah, it might be too.
You start here. Yeah. See, you touched on all of this. These books.
You can zip. It's toward the end.
Toward the end, let me.
Yeah, after boring, just there'll be resources. And there was this little page, I think it was just after this. There we go. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Sultan Abdul Majid, who was the father of Sultan Abdul Hamid, also recently, when he heard of the potato famine in Ireland, he wanted to send 10,000 Ottoman lira, which is equivalent to about $1 million these days. I'm not sure what it was back then, but it was a great deal of money. And he didn't send it between Queen Victoria, their queen, was not happy that the Ottomans would outdo her in sending assistance to. So he sent many ships with supplies and goods and things like that. So he's remembered actually in Ireland very fondly, that they remember the Ottoman Empire very much. So I try to read my small print here. The harem. Oh, don't get me started on the harem. You know, the harem. What was the harem? The harem was the family part of the palace of the Sultan. The only men who could enter were the Sultan and his immediate family, his sons, not even the
Mhm.
uncles and things like that. It was just a woman's atmosphere. No one could enter. So how did all these Western painters imagine what was going on in there? I mean, that's their imagination, which created this Orientalism, what we imagine going on. Of course, men are imagining. But the few European women that did visit and were allowed to come in the harem write very different narratives about how the women lived in the harems. And yes, they did have eunuchs. Eunuchs also were brought into the country. They were educated. These were African slaves. They were brought into the Ottoman Empire. They were the most educated people in the palace. They were all Hafiz Quran, and they were the people that sat next to the Sultan at all times. They don't show this in the series, but they were the people always standing. If you watch Mehmed, he always has two guards standing with him. Muhammad the Conqueror. Sultan Abdul Hamid had two eunuchs with him always. So they rose very high. They could go into the harem because they were a man without the physical needs of a woman. And often they were already taken as captives when they'd been castrated by Africans for the slave trade. So they didn't necessarily go, well, let's castrate these guys. The habit had already started in Africa. So subhanAllah. The whole harem thing is just crazy. And interestingly, the sultans, they didn't want to have too many sons because their son would be the successor because they followed in a whole line of generation after generation after generation. So they didn't have that many wives. And once a wife had a son, she was done. And they wanted to have a few sons spare because if one wasn't good or wasn't righteous or wasn't, following his father's footsteps, they needed to have some extra people. And their wives were taken from largely their defeated peoples who were often not Muslim. In fact, one of the wives of the father of Muhammad the Conqueror, Murad II, was a Hungarian Christian woman who retained her Christianity, but nevertheless was a staunch supporter of her husband and of the Ottoman conquest in Constantinople. But she remained a Christian, still, worshiping as she worshiped and so forth.
Mhm.
So that takes a lot with, we forced conversion. No, that was the other guys.
Yes.
But
Well,
again, like if you know history, you can at least answer with evidence.
yeah.
Be
And this is
polite,
why it's important to study and important to know these things so that you're not steered the wrong way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And honestly, most Muslims are completely submerged under a Western narrative. I
Mhm.
hear the questions that Dr. Yaqub's students ask him. Like he says, well, let's unpack that. What about the decline? What about fratricide? What about the harem? What about the concubines? What about? And the focus is just on the decline of all our empire. Okay, but go back and look at the empire, and then we can just discuss the decline. Because yes, there's something to learn from the decline as well. But that seems to be the only focus we have. How do we decline? Well, what did we do before that? That's what we need to know because that's what the world is neglecting or erasing or misrepresenting. So, as I said in the beginning, Rabbi Zidni ilma, Allah increase us in guidance, inshallah. But I hope we kind of, set up we got that curiosity lit up a little bit and some heads out there today, inshallah. I
Yes.
talk very fast and I talk a lot, so apologies.
No
And
worries.
anything
Shared
regardless,
some great
foolish
resources.
and non-truthful is, of course, from me, but everything else is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I thank him so much for bringing me into this religion, guiding me. The name I took was Nur al-Huda, which is light of guidance. I have this corny thing from stage lights to light of guidance.
Very nice.
And then I took my husband's name, Saadi, which is happy. So I was guided to the light of Islam and became happy. Alhamdulillah.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time and sharing your knowledge.
Yeah. Thank you for your assistance, Ashley.
Definitely inspired people. No problem. No problem. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Jazakallahu khair.
And we'll be live every Friday this month at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. So join us next week for another topic, another guest, and I'll see you then. Assalamu alaikum.